Hey guys, and welcome to my recap of day 2 of the 2026 Scrabble Players Championships held a couple of weeks ago in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. As I talked about in the previous video, day 1 went about as well as I could have asked for. I did lose one game, but otherwise I won all 6 in dominant fashion, and I was sitting at 6-1 with a big spread in first place at the end of the day. I featured a really fun game I played against Mike Thielen in game 2 of the tournament where I was down over 100 early and mounted an absurd 4-turn comeback where the margin swung by over 300 points, and I ended up winning the game by almost 200. So definitely check out yesterday's video if you haven't already. I even talked about how that night, while I was out to dinner with a bunch of friends, I got pooped on by a bird, which in theory is supposed to bring good luck. So like I said, I was feeling great. I was feeling lucky. Everything was going well after day 1, and then we enter day 2. Day 2 got off to a bit of a rocky start, if I'm being honest, before the games even began. So one thing that's worth mentioning about Cedar Rapids is it was a great city for the tournament to be in. It was a really fun place to explore and walk around. There were a lot of fun food options. The hotel was really nice. However, there was one major problem. The host hotel was situated right next to a rail yard, and multiple times throughout the night, these freight trains would come through, blaring their horns super loudly and wake people up. Even staying on the 14th floor of the hotel, guys, it was so loud. It almost sounded like an explosion. I'm even going to play a video I took one night from bed at around 4 in the morning just to show you guys how loud it was. Here you go. Yeah, so basically imagine this, but happening at random hours multiple times throughout the night while you're trying to get a good night's rest during a big Scrabble tournament. And the night between day 1 and day 2 of the tournament was probably the worst night for the trains. I think there were at least 3, if not 4 different times throughout the night I got blasted awake by one of these freight trains. It happened first at like midnight, then 2 in the morning, then 4 in the morning, then even at like 6 in the morning. It was just awful. And I barely slept that night. I was feeling really tired that next morning. I tried to shake it off by having a cup of coffee and going to the gym, but I definitely was not feeling 100% and entered an important and grueling day of Scrabble already feeling a bit tired and depleted. So not necessarily the way you want to start, but the morning actually went super well. I managed to go 3-1 in the morning session, so I'm still sitting at 9-2 going into lunch. Again, feeling a bit tired, but otherwise feeling pretty good. And then in round 12, I am paired against none other than Nigel Peltier, my finals opponent from last year's Scrabble Players Championship, who, as I'm sure you guys all know, managed to dethrone me in a very eventful Game 5 to capture his first title and relegate me to the runner-up position, at least for that year. And so Nigel and I are playing in this really exciting rematch from last summer in Game 12. It's on the live stream, and I am going to show you the game right now. Nigel has the first move in our game and opens with quite a strong opening rack. AENRSU blank gives him tons of available bingo options. He opts for Signore for 64 points, which makes a ton of sense. The blank Y is very unlikely to be helpful for me, and by starting his word with 3 consecutive consonants, he makes overlaps either for bingos or other high-scoring plays pretty difficult. The computer very slightly prefers a Sunder in the same spot, but I think what he did with Signore is perfectly fine. And now I'm already having flashbacks to last summer, guys. I'm thinking, oh man, here he goes again. He's opening with a blank bingo. He's going to bingo like 6 times this game and score 599 points and just absolutely destroy me, right? If you know, you know. Check out Game 5 from last summer if you haven't already. And that's especially the case when I'm saddled with this annoying rack with mostly 1-pointers and no playable bingos and no way to really score anything. But luckily for me, I managed to keep my focus and keep my composure and find what appears to be a sad play, but my best play of Ain scoring a measly 12 points. What this play does well is it keeps a strong lead of ADEN. Being down early, it's a big priority for me to try to bingo as soon as possible, and it also allows me to hopefully fit 7-letter words ending in ED on row 6, making day. Nigel, thankfully for me, gets a bit of a clunky draw after his opening bingo, pulling a V, 2 Gs, and 2 Is. The more standard decision here would be to play Veggie for 22 points, clearing out most of the clunk on his rack. He opts to play a little bit shorter and more defensively with Viga. The computer rates this as a small mistake, but Nigel is definitely more of a defensive and closed board player, so especially being out to an early lead, this is much more his style. Can't blame him for making this play. Luckily for me, I do draw the second blank out of the bag and am able to find easily my best play, a 9-letter bingo of Deadening through the IN of the board for 86 points, retaking the lead and asserting that I am not going to go down this game without a fight. Nigel here makes a very nice play. He plays egg for 15 points through the blank G of deadening, hooking AY to make A and NU to make nug. There really isn't a better option for Nigel here. ADEIL is a very solid leave. He could play longer with something like Adeljid, but turnover is devalued here because both of the blanks are already gone. Normally, early in the game, when you want to play a lot of tiles, is to try to draw one of the valuable blanks, but there's no clear upside in that sense. So I think playing shorter here, keeping things a bit more under control, and keeping a well-balanced leave makes a lot of sense for Nigel. So it's my turn now, roughly a tie game. I have no standout option. I decide to play Oof for 24 points, overlapping OD, OE, and Fa, which makes a good amount of sense. The computer actually wants me to play Foo here for the same score, probably to keep the D of deadening open, because I have two E's, I have a decent leave, and the computer may think I'm a favorite to hit that line. I thought about this, but I felt here I'm in a solid position if I play more defensively. I'm going to be going up 30 points. Nigel also just played off 2 tiles for a pretty small score, so I think his range after that kind of play is stronger than average, and I really don't want to allow him to beat me to a bingo to the D, and I just didn't feel EENP was all that good. So I'm content with my decision to play Oof here with a small lead and force Nigel to deal with this increasingly tight board on his next turn. Nigel makes his pretty clear best play, in my opinion, Maw for 30 points, making Fam, Da, and Oo. There really isn't anything better for him to do here. This play scores, balances his rack nicely, and doesn't give me anything in return. So we're both kind of playing a bit of a game of chicken at this point, guys. It's a close game, and both of us know that whoever opens is going to give the other guy an advantage because they will then have first crack at whatever is opened. So we're both kind of just grooming our racks here, biding our time. I follow suit here. I play even for 28 points, which I'm very happy to get down. Again, doesn't really give much back to Nigel. It's not easy to make a 6-letter word starting with an E that's going to reach a triple. I'm still holding on to a small but clear lead, and I'm keeping a very nice leave of EPR. Nigel here does strike next. He plays his only bingo of spilled, opening a lot of space on the right, but obviously it's his only bingo. He's got to do it. So with this play, Nigel goes up by 48 points and puts me into a pretty challenging position. I have a lot of options here. I end up going with parked to the D of spilled, which does appear to be a small but clear mistake. I considered several other options. I actually did think about puked, the engine's top choice, which looks very counterintuitive, keeping the duplicated R, but it seems better than parked for a couple of reasons. Number one, playing parked has a few drawbacks, especially keeping the U is not great. There are still 2 more U's unseen, and playing 5 tiles, I do run a risk of duplicating the U, which would of course be terrible. It also creates a big scoring spot for Nigel by putting the A next to the triple letter score. He just drew 7 tiles, so there is certainly a chance he drew the Z and could play something like Za both ways for over 60 points, which would be a disaster. I was certainly aware of this risk, but I felt that getting rid of the duplicated R was enough to justify taking the chance. Also, parked scoring 3 more points than puked was certainly a little bit of a factor as well. But here, guys, I think I overestimated just how bad the duplicated R's are. They're really not that much worse than keeping a U in this situation, and I think I also underestimated the danger of the spot I was creating for Nigel by playing parked. I was very fixated on the Z, but even if Nigel doesn't have the Z, if he's got one of several remaining 4-pointers that could go there, like one of the 2 H's or one of the 2 Y's, that's going to still give him an easy 35 or so point play, which on this board, given how constricted it is still a pretty big deal. So I think here what I need to do is be a little more patient with puked, try to keep my deficit small, not give Nigel anything back. Or if I don't want to be patient, play darker down here, which actually I think I personally prefer. I generally like being a bit more proactive and opening the board in more of a controlled way when I'm at a deficit. So I like this, not giving back any massive scoring spots, but also creating some long-term bingo threats for myself in the bottom right corner of the board. So definitely a bit of an inaccuracy here with parked. The computer only assesses it a 0.3% mistake, but I actually think it's a little bit worse. And Nigel capitalizes on my play here. He plays Moho for 36 points. Again, he didn't have the Z, but even with the H, he's able to get a very nice score and clean out his rack. If I had played puked, then his options would have been a lot more limited. And here, I'm already kind of kicking myself for playing parked, especially after I have a horrendous draw, pulling not only a second U, which I was afraid of, but also a W. We know how bad UW is, so UUW is, of course, even worse. And I pull an I along with a B along with it. And here I'm in just a brutal spot. I see all of the plays that the computer prefers over the board. I consider Virtue, but I just can't really stomach keeping BUW. I saw Brute here as well, but again, IUW, even for 21 points, just seemed so awful. And the last play I considered here was Worst, which keeps the most palatable leave of any of these three plays I just mentioned. Certainly not a good leave. BIU's a terrible leave, but at least it doesn't keep the dreaded UW combo, so that's something. But what I really didn't like about this play, guys, was it takes away my best bingo line on the board. If we remove Worst from the board for a second, really my only bingo lane right now is to draw one of the two remaining S's and hit a 7-letter word with A's on the 10 row. And what's nice about that line is it's extremely difficult for Nigel to block. If he doesn't have one of the S's himself or the T to play tag, in fact, it's probably impossible for him to do anything about that. And if he were to make a play with A's or a play down from the S of Signore making tag, he's probably going to open some other space in the process. So the last thing I wanted to do was do Nigel's job for him in such a perfect way by making this play and essentially leaving myself 0 bingo lines on this board. Yes, I'd only be down 27, but I'm down 27. It's Nigel's turn, so he has tempo advantage, and I'm keeping a horrendous leave, so everything is working against me. I really hated my chances after Worst. And like I said, I felt being at this deficit, I needed to be more proactive and get myself more quickly back into a balanced rack and more quickly into a situation where I could threaten the bingo. So I made the rather draconian decision to exchange 7 here, chucking everything back into the bag. Why did I exchange all 7? Why didn't I keep something like IRT? That would be more stereotypically balanced. A couple of reasons. Number one, again, like I said, my best bingo lane by far here revolves heavily around drawing an S. So the more tiles I exchange, the more the probability is of me drawing an S, which I felt was key. And you might be thinking, okay, well, maybe keep a T at least to try to bingo with ST down from tag. The problem is, though, guys, there are still 5 more T's left. So I felt I was extremely likely to redraw a T, and I, of course, didn't want to end up with duplicated T's, which is a bit clunky. So here I'm like, let's just exchange all 7 and start fresh. Definitely a questionable decision, but I'm okay with it. Nigel here has 3 T's, speaking of T's, and he makes his best play here, Jib for 28 points. It's a terrible leave, but he's building his lead. There's absolutely no reason here for him to help me and open the board. This is absolutely what he should be doing. And I do draw well after my exchange, EINSTXY. I'm, of course, especially thrilled to see that much-needed S, and I quickly see and rule out the play of X signs. It's 42 points, but I just cannot afford to get rid of that S here, guys. It is too valuable. It is really my only lifeline back into this game. So here I decide to play Lynx for 28 points, which seems pretty solid. Scores well, keeps EIST, which is a great leave. And it also opens an N, which is an outstanding floater, especially as the pool does continue to trend Val heavy. One interesting play I actually regretted not making after the next couple of turns is Pixie from the P of Spilled, very aggressively setting up my S for Pixies. Of course, there is one more S unseen, and Nigel could slam the door if he has a big play with it, but it does make his life fairly annoying if he doesn't have the S. As with the 2 vowels next to each other, the I and the E in Pixie, it could be difficult for him to make an effective overlap that blocks Pixies. So this is a cool idea because if I do draw bingo with Pixies, it is going to score a lot, and there are plenty of vowels in the pool. Plus, I do float the 2 tiles in Pixie, the I and the E, if Nigel were to leave those open, which could be helpful for me making an 8-letter word as well. The computer doesn't rate this among its top choices, but I do think, given how much I'm down here, I actually should have done this and been a little bit more proactive because, as we'll see, Lynx was fairly easy for Nigel to defend against, and it didn't really leave me with all that good options. But yeah, Nigel here with, again, a clunky rack makes a very nice play here of Twixt for 15 points. There is just nothing better for him to do here. It's certainly not worth exchanging, and there are no other plays in other parts of the board. Twixt does create some lines for 7s, either above or below the T, but it also blocks the N of Lynx, which is a really nice line for 8s, and I think this play makes a ton of sense. And unfortunately for me, I have an absolute disaster draw after Lynx, pulling EII to my leave of EIST. And that is another reason, guys, why I think Lynx was not a great play. There were a ton of I's unseen in particular, and EIST certainly ran the risk of eye trouble, which I was aware of, but I just didn't give serious consideration to Pixie as I maybe should have. But in any case, I here was forced to exchange again, guys. There is just nothing else to do. There is no way you can play through this. I trade 3 very reluctantly, keeping EIST, and just praying I'm going to get a 7-letter bingo to stay in the game on my next turn. Nigel here draws actually quite well after Twixt. This rack does look clunky, but High scoring tiles and tiles like the CH and the Z are exactly what you want when you have a lead like this, because it's going to enable you to keep the scoring pressure on and try to outrun any bingos your opponent might get. And that's exactly what Nigel does here, playing Chubb, scoring excellently, scoring 33 points and keeping the Z for additional scoring. Nigel's going up over 90 points in this position. He is in outstanding shape. And I draw a little bit better, although once again, I pull a second eye out of the bag. I play If for 24 points. Not a very inspiring play, but like, what else am I going to do? I have to score something. I have to get rid of one of my eyes, and I have to just keep hoping that I'm going to get a bingo down sooner or later. But again here, guys, I wasn't feeling out of it because I still have this line on row 10 with A's. And like I said earlier, it's going to be extremely difficult for Nigel to block that in many cases. So I felt as long as I can get a bingo down there and then maybe catch Nigel with a bad rack so he doesn't have counterplay, I could still get back into this game. So that's why, even though I'm in a bad position here, I wasn't panicking. I wasn't making any desperation openings just yet. Nigel here makes another very interesting play. He has got some consonant trouble, so he's got the opposite problem as I do, and he plays Dells for 12 to the S of Signore, keeping the somewhat clunky looking but also powerful GTZ leave. The computer wants him to play Ed for 23 over here, making Ed and Dumb, which I would definitely not do. The last thing you want to do generally when you have a lead like this is keep a rack that has all consonants, especially a rack with 5 consonants, just because then you do run the risk of not having a single vowel, which could be a disaster if your opponent does make a desperation opening and you're completely unable to do anything about it. So I think if Nigel is going to keep no vowels here, which is what he did, he definitely wants to play longer, because the odds of him, especially in a vowel-heavy pool, drawing no vowels after Dells are extremely small. So I think this play makes a lot of sense. I might have gone with Geltz in the same spot just because the G is a considerably clunkier tile than the D, but either way, very tough turn for him. I think playing along this column, keeping the Z makes a ton of sense. And here I'm in another very tough position where I have A, E, I, Q, S, T, U. I draw the Q, but also the U on a 2-tile pool, which is obviously interesting. And thankfully here, the Q does at least enable me to score points and keep myself comfortably within range so that if I do draw a bingo, I may be able to come back into this game. And I consider several options here. I ultimately settle on Quail for 34, keeping the very strong EST leave. Another option I considered strongly was Quite for 40, maximizing my score playing under Twixt. The problem with this is that I felt Nigel was too likely to make a play through the Eye of Quite, which would simultaneously score and block all of the openings. It's worth mentioning Quite does create a very sneaky second S-line. Piste is a word, P-I-S-T-E, so this threatens insertion bingos ending in S on the 12 row, but again, if Nigel plays anything through the Eye of Quite, that's automatically blocked. So I didn't like this. It just allows Nigel to simultaneously score and block a bit too easily. I also very strongly considered Quid over here, because it keeps a great leaf and also sets up Squid or Equid. This may be a little bit better than Quail, but I ultimately decided on Quail just because I felt getting rid of that extra vowel was very good, because the pool continues to be vowel heavy. It also gets me 6 extra points immediately, and I am like just barely hanging on here, guys, to being able to come back with a bingo. I'm down 81 points. I need every point I can get so that my bingo actually gives me a real shot to come back into the game. So very tough turn here. I think Quail is fine, but nothing is all that inspiring. And here, Nigel has another very interesting decision on his hands. He's up 47 points, and he's facing a pool that's pretty strong for bingos, but it's vowel heavy, and there are like no scoring tiles left. If you guys look at the right, from Nigel's perspective, the only tile unseen out of all 22 that is worth more than 1 point is the 3-point C. So Nigel here really does not have to worry at all about me getting a big scoring play. He just has to worry about bingos. And here he plays Gyoza for 36, which looks very standard. It scores well, it blocks several of the lines I just opened with Quail, and it keeps a very flexible ART leave. And it puts him up by enough that if I do manage to bingo either with A's or below Twixt, my bingo is going to score relatively little. He should have enough counterplay to hopefully hold on unless I bingo again. Interestingly, the computer wants him to save the Z, probably just because it is literally the only scoring tile remaining. Something like Gray Out is a really cool idea. Nigel actually did tell me after the game he strongly considered this play. The idea here is that he sets up a very strong threat of something like Zag or Zig in the top left, which would score 39 points. And this could offer him even more assurance, possibly than Gyoza, that he is going to outrun a bingo if I do happen to hit one. Yes, he gives up 12 points immediately over Gyoza, but he's almost guaranteed a nearly 40-point play next turn, either through the G of gray out, which is by definition staying open if I bingo, or with the pool having so many vowels, any bingo I make either with A's or on the bottom is going to open at least one triple word score that he can probably pounce on with his Z. So very educational position here. If anything, just shows the importance of holding on to scoring tiles when you're trying to maintain a lead. While Gyoza should win the vast majority of games, there is some risk to keeping ART, especially in a pool that has a lot of vowels and 3 more R's and 3 more T's. Nigel could end up with like triplicate R's or something clunky and just not have a good way to respond. And if I do manage to bingo and he has one of those clunky racks and then I outdraw him on my next pool, he could maybe get into trouble in some cases. So either way, Gyoza is still a very solid play, should win the majority of the time, but it may actually be better for him to somewhat counterintuitively hold back his Z at a point sacrifice. And here I finally get the bingo I've been waiting for like the whole game. I play retorts and A's for 64 points. Not feeling great still. I'm going to be down 19 points after this bingo, but I see the pool is very vowel heavy, 11 vowels and 7 consonants from my perspective. So I'm thinking, all right, if Nigel has like 6 or maybe even 7 vowels and I draw another bingo out of the bag or he can't do anything, I could still win this game. I'm simply down too much here to justify passing up the bingo. I have to take this and just hope for the best. I figured the odds of Nigel having a big bingo or any sort of triple or anything crazy given the constituency of the pool were pretty small. Unfortunately, that's what happened. Nigel immediately turns the board around, slaps down Terraria for 131 points. Good night, game over. And I'm just pretty stunned at this point, guys. Like, I had worked so hard to stay in this game. I finally hit my bingo. I'm like, all right, I have a chance. I'm not necessarily expecting to win, but I'm expecting to at least have some sort of chance. And then boom, 131 points, triple, game over. So I was a bit rattled, if I'm being honest, but thankfully I did regain enough composure here to realize that Nigel is going to go out by force. He's got Antic in multiple spots on the bottom left. He's got Tinkt in multiple spots. So my best endgame play here, which I made, is just to grab points with Voices for 22 points and allow Nigel to go out and cap off a surprisingly lopsided win, given how tight and tense this game was, 509 to 361. So definitely I was feeling a bit dejected after this one, if I'm being honest, guys. I figured if I lost, it was going to be a close loss. I was not expecting to lose by 150 or so points here, which did send me pretty far down in the standings just because of point spread. So I wasn't feeling great after this one. And the next 2 games, needless to say, did not help either. After my loss to Nigel, I just showed you guys, I lost 2 more brutal games to longtime experts Jerry Lerman and Jason Lee. In both of these games, my opponents either broke or got nearly 500 points. I struggled to make it out of the mid 300s, so I lost 3 games by about an average of 150 each, going 0-3, minus 450 or so in the afternoon. An absolutely dreadful afternoon. Some really tough breaks, like the Terraria one I just showed you guys. I also did make a couple uncharacteristic word knowledge errors, like letting a phony go against Jason in the other games. And I was definitely, certainly for me, I tend to be pretty even-keeled during tournaments, but I could definitely feel myself starting to get on tilt and get really frustrated at how things were going, especially in the 3rd game of that afternoon against Jason when I knew I was going to lose and had already been having such a difficult afternoon, which was especially frustrating given, like I said, how good things were going on day 1 and even in the morning of day 2. So again, guys, Scrabble is an absolute roller coaster. You just never know what's going to happen. You could have a great start and then you have an afternoon that's just absolutely horrendous. On the flip side, you can have a terrible start and have an afternoon that's absolutely wonderful. So yeah, I was really not feeling great. After that 3rd loss, I had dropped from 9-2 and in first place to 9-5 and somewhere back, I think, just outside of the top 10, feeling pretty demoralized. And this is where, guys, I made actually, I think, one of my best decisions of the entire tournament, and it didn't even come on the Scrabble board. I always tell people that it's really important to try to avoid getting frustrated and going on tilt during the Scrabble tournament. After all, if you go on tilt, you're going to be not thinking as clearly, you're going to be expending energy thinking about what could have been before, and you're going to lose focus. All bad things. And like I said, I am very good about not going on tilt. It takes a lot for me to hit a breaking point and start steaming during a tournament. But sometimes, although rarely, I do hit that breaking point, and that is exactly what happened to me. So whether it's me or anybody else, you absolutely have to have a reset mechanism when you do hit that breaking point. You need to find a way to basically reset your brain as if the tournament hasn't even started. You need to get out of this funk that you're in and be able to continue the tournament with a clear head. If you don't, you're going to keep spiraling, you're going to keep making bad decisions, and you're going to keep losing. So in this moment, I turned to one of my favorite reset mechanisms that I've had to use a couple of times. Thankfully, not too many, but I've always had great success with it. As soon as the last game ended, I immediately beelined out of the playing room straight across the street for my car, got in my car, and immediately drove an hour aimlessly up the interstate, blasting music the whole way. Now, I had to mute the audio for copyright reasons, but I can tell you that I was listening to Ella Langley the whole way, so major shout out to Ella. In any case, after an hour of blasting Ella Langley up Interstate 380, I end up in the small town of Waterloo, Iowa. I decide I've had enough of that. I'm feeling much better mentally, so I get off the highway, find dinner at a Mexican place, have a really good chimichanga, and then hit the road back to Cedar Rapids. I finally get back to the hotel and pretty much go straight to my room, feeling exhausted, but much better mentally than I was before, and ready to hopefully get some sleep, trains permitting, and reset for day 3 and try to rebound up the leaderboard. So that's going to do it for day 2, guys. Thanks for watching, and be sure to tune in for the day 3 recap to find out if my storming out of the playing room and driving an hour in each direction to Waterloo, Iowa to reset myself mentally paid dividends on the pivotal day 3. Bye, guys.